Welcome, everyone, to a special edition. Herschel had joined the webinar series earlier and talked about anger and addiction, and there was so much to talk about, and I invited Herschel to come back. We're recording this in the middle of December, so with holidays coming up, and I know things can go awry, and so I thought having a little extra boost of, some practical tools and how we can navigate things could be useful. So we hope you find that helpful. So without further ado, Herschel, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you so much, Tammy. It's great to be back. Good to see we have several participants. And yeah, just to talk about the holidays, it's really interesting, right? Holidays are one of the most challenging times for everyone, yet it's the least likely time for us to get the support we actually need. When we're talking about treatment and therapy and support, those things are usually put on the back burner during the holiday season. Um, and so many problems arise during the holiday season. So it's great that you guys are attending during the holiday season because, in my experience, this is the time where we need the most support, right? So, um, in a lot of aspects of your lives, right, you guys are successful, jobs, fixing things, relationships, all sorts of things that we have become really great at. You solve problems, you show up for others, you carry responsibility well, and that strength is real, right? But when we're talking about our mental health, sorry, let me try to move out of the way of this. When we're talking about our mental health um, and destructive behaviors, our willpower alone is not enough. And that's really hard for us to accept, right? Because of all these things that we're able to do with success, we assume that things like addiction and our mental health fall into the same category, that I could handle this on my own. But those things often overpower logic, right? And when we try to carry these things alone, it can create exhaustion and shame. I look at mental health and addiction and anger within the realm of the disease model, right? If we're talking about a regular health disease that is accepted as a disease, um, let's say someone has cancer or something, they wake up in the morning and then they say, I'm not going to have cancer anymore, right? That's not going to work. They need to get treatment, they need to get help. And if we look at mental health and our destructive behaviors, whether it's addiction or whether it's lashing out or acting out, whatever it is, I'm sure there have been times for those of you who are here that have woke up in the morning and said, I'm not going to act out anymore, or I'm not going to be mean to my partner, or whatever it is. And then eventually we end up doing it, right? So there's a lot of different theories and philosophies over mental health and addiction, but for me it is very helpful to view these things as a disease model, because it enables me to realize that my willpower alone is not enough to work on these things, and I need to get treatment just like I would for any other health disease, right? And that's what I like to tell to the clients that I work with. And it takes this huge weight off of our shoulders when we view it in that way, in a way that I can't do this on my own. But the good news is that I don't have to anymore, because we spend our whole lives trying to do these things on our own. But it's the mental health and the destructive behaviors is the one aspect of our lives that we don't have to do on our own, and we can't do it on our own, right? So it is a huge relief to accept that fact. And if you guys have heard of the concept of surrendering, that's essentially what the concept of surrendering is giving it up, that I don't have to do this on my own anymore. And that's what you guys are doing by attending this webinar, is starting to acknowledge that and accept that, right? um, so yeah, by allowing support, you're doing something courageous right now. Recovery and healing is about releasing pressure, not adding more. And that's what we did when we tried to to tackle everything on our own. It was just adding all this weight. I love to use the expression, why did one straw break the camel's back? Because there's a million other straws underneath it. So being able to remove some of those things off of our back and, trusting the help of professionals or trusting the help of our support network really takes a lot of weight off of our shoulders. So just to recap a little bit about I think it was last month, I did a session, which was sort of my introductory session, where anger is often a secondary emotion that's masking something underneath it. Fear is one of the biggest ones, but shame is big as well. The example I always like to use is I go home from work and I see my girlfriend on the phone with someone and I get angry, right? So what is that? What am I really feeling in that situation? It's not like I automatically get angry. No, in that situation, I'm actually afraid. I'm afraid that she's on the phone with someone else. I'm afraid that she's going to leave me. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough for her. Um, and that just comes out as anger, but it's really fear in that situation. Unprocessed anger fuels acting out and relapse patterns. Awareness creates the space between reaction and response. So in terms of one of the sessions that I like to do when I do sessions with clients is the stages of change. Um, and that just acknowledges that awareness is the first step towards change. The first stage of change is the contemplation stage of change, which just means to think. Before that is the pre-contemplation stage. So the pre-contemplation stage is when we were doing our destructive behaviors and we didn't think there was anything wrong with it, whether it was cheating, lying, stealing, fighting, whatever it was. That's just what was happening, and there was nothing wrong with that in our mind. Then something happens. Maybe your partner catches you. Maybe you get arrested. Maybe you lose your job or you get a DUI, whatever it is. Something happens where the thought enters your mind. The first time the thought enters your mind, maybe I do have an issue. Maybe this is something I need to work on, right? That's the contemplation stage. Then we have the planning stage, which is where we plan the change we're trying to make. So if we're talking about anger or unhealthy manifestations of anger, something happened, you got in a fight, you got in trouble, you started thinking about change, so you started doing some research. What can I do to cope with my anger? Is there an anger management specialist that I could work with to help me? Then you start taking action for that change that you're trying to make. You're learning about the changes, you're practicing the coping skills. And then hopefully for all of you, the final stage is the maintenance stage. Whatever change you're trying to make, you are maintaining that change. And then unfortunately, these stages sort of create a circle for a lot of people where eventually something might happen and you fall right back to the old behaviors, and then you're back again in the pre-contemplation stage. I'm hopeful for all of you, for whatever changes you're trying to make to better yourself, that you just sort of end at the maintenance stage and you're able to carry that on. But just be mindful that for a lot of people, for whatever change they're trying to make, relapse is very common. And it's important to be mindful of that because if we're overconfident in whatever change you're trying to make, that's a huge risk factor. If you think you're doing a sex addiction treatment program for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, and then after that you're cured, you have nothing to worry about, that's a huge risk factor. If you are working on letting go of resentment towards a partner that betrayed you because it's causing you pain, and you think you do one family therapy session, and it was a good family therapy session, so it's over with, that's a huge risk factor, right? All these things, it's called maintenance because we need to maintain it, right? It's not like we could just put our feet up after we do the initial phases of the work and then we're cured. No, these are things that we continuously need to maintain and continuously need to work on. And this goes for anything. If we're just talking about eating healthier, like I personally was very unhealthy. Then I went to the doctor and I realized I needed to change my habits. I started eating healthier. Then I lost someone really close to me. And, I went home for the funeral and I just didn't care about what I was eating. And then I fell back into all my unhealthy eating patterns for months. So these stages of change are not just for our anger or our addiction or our resentments. These are for anything, and it's important to be mindful that relapse easily happens if we don't maintain what we're working on. We also talked a little bit last session, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into these three concepts that are so important for not only anger, but also for healing. Resentment builds up when feelings go unexpressed or unresolved. Everybody tends to hold resentments towards people, but the resentments that we hold toward those people are not doing anything to those people, right? All they're doing is causing us unnecessary pain and hurting us and continuing to allow that person that hurt us in the past to continue to hurt us, essentially, right? Then we have our pride. Pride says, I shouldn't need help. Going back to, I can handle these things on my own, or I don't need this. Then we have our ego, which tells us I'm right and you're wrong, which when we're talking about relationships, which I'm based on my group that I did with you guys last month, relationships are a big factor, right? And our ego tends to get in the way of healing those relationships, or not even necessarily healing the relationships, but healing ourselves. I'm right and you're wrong. We can't change other people's perceptions. All we could change is what we're feeling and what we're going through, and having that need to prove that I'm right and you're wrong can really get in the way of healing and could also build resentment. These resentments turn inward, right? And they become anger. We often look as resentment as the number one offender when we're talking about addiction, whatever addiction. A lot of times, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that, a lot of times resentment can turn to relapse. We have our pride blocks vulnerability and repair, right? So our pride can really get in the way. Ego escalates conflict and fuels impulsive behavior. Okay. So these are three things: resentment, pride, and ego can really get in the way of any healing or any change that we are trying to make. Okay. So letting go of these things doesn't mean excusing behavior. It means choosing peace over control. Anger loses our power when anger loses power when we release our resentment, right? So it's not necessarily about letting these people back into our lives or anything like that. It's about letting go for ourselves, right? Because if we hold on to these resentments for people that wronged us or people that hurt us or people that did something to us, it's really just causing us pain, and it's going to cause us a lot of problems. What they did, right? We can't change that with our resentment. So we really need to work on being able to release that and being able to let that go. So a lot of times anger can lead to acting out. Specifically, one of the ways that I want to focus on with this group is, unmanaged anger can lead to dishonesty, acting out, and broken trust, specifically betrayal. People betray values before they betray others. And a lot of times, someone might have anger towards a partner or someone or someone important to them, and they think that by acting out or cheating on them or betraying them in some way. Or even I've had clients who thought getting drunk or high can teach their partner a lesson if their partner wanted them to be sober, things like that. But what this really does is it creates that person guilt. The person who does it, who does the betrayal, creates guilt and a deeper shame, right? We're not teaching them a lesson, right? We're damaging relationships, we're hurting ourselves, and we're not really accomplishing much, even though in the moment it might feel like it. But that goes back to the resentments that we hold. And then in terms of people that are betrayed, right? That can result in a lot of anger, grief, and fear. Um, Trust is damaged. It wounds. It wounds us, right? If we're betrayed, and that can trigger in a betrayed partner the fight or flight response, right? The survival instinct, and that's natural, right? If a partner betrays us, our survival instinct kicks in. Um, that's what we tend to do when any wrong is done to us. Is that our fight or flight instinct, our limbic system, is where the fight or flight aspect of our brain is. And in modern society, we really tend to overuse that fight or flight response because I have everything I need to survive, right? I have a beautiful home. I have food in the fridge. I have a job. My survival is not at risk. But that example I gave you, when I went home and I saw my girlfriend on the phone with someone, my survival instinct kicked in. My brain goes into fight or flight mode, and I feel like the world is on fire, right? Meanwhile, like I said, I'm not in survival mode, and as humans, we have this survival instinct for a reason, right? When there are emergencies and things like that, but our brain kicks it into this mode all the time. When we get in a fight with our partner, um, when they don't do something that they said, our brain kicks it into survival mode. And it's really unnecessary, right? We need to use the prefrontal cortex in those situations where we're actually thinking, right? And we're not just reacting to the situation impulsively, because that's what used to happen, whether it was in terms of acting out, right? Something happened and your brain went to fight or flight mode. And that's where the acting out was really a flight, right? In the act of acting out, you were escaping from whatever it was that didn't want to feel. So that was the flight. And in terms of betrayed partners, the survival instinct often kicks in. It might kick in as acting out in different ways, right? As an escape, or it might kick in a fight. And I'm not trying to say that it's not necessarily justified, right? Maybe it is justified. That's for you to determine. But I just want you to realize that your brain is in survival mode. And we often do really impulsive things when we're in survival mode that aren't necessary. We may overreact. Um, and then it can turn into this resentment that, like I said, if we resent our partner for betraying us, that resentment is not doing anything to them. That resentment is just causing us continued pain, and it's causing whatever they did to continue to hurt us, right? So being able to let that go is so important in the healing process, letting go of the resentment. And I'm not saying you need to let them back in your lives. That's not what I'm saying, right? I'm saying being able to let go of resentment is important for you. And we're going to talk about that. Um, in terms of betrayal, sometimes reconciliation is possible, right? If we're able to think clearly and not be in the fight or flight aspect, sometimes it is possible. Sometimes it's not, right? But the thing I want to make clear is that healing is possible in both of those situations, right? Um, and it really comes within, and it really comes with being able to let go of that resentment. It doesn't mean you need to necessarily, the relationship needs to be the same, but resentment is just going to weigh you down and continue to allow them to cause you pain. um, Holding resentment keeps you emotionally tied to the pain, and letting go restores personal freedom. It's all about, I wrote, peace is an inside job, right? The only thing that matters is in whatever aspect of anger you're dealing with right now, whether it's the anger caused you to act out, or you're feeling the anger because someone betrayed you. What matters is that your own self-worth and your own self-confidence and your own self-love, you're working on that, right? Because if you betrayed someone, it's very likely that you felt a hole inside of yourself. You felt that you were missing something, right? It probably didn't have anything to do with the person that, it may not have anything to do with the person that you betrayed, right? It was likely something to do with your own self-worth, or whatever you thought of yourself. And on the other side of that coin, um, right, a lot of times when we're betrayed, we blame ourselves. Um, and it usually has nothing to do with us, right? It usually has to do with the person that betrayed us. So being able to view ourselves as worthy and lovable, regardless of what we did or regardless of what was done to us, you guys all deserve it. And it's necessary for you to be able to move forward and for you to be able to heal. What's not necessarily necessary is having the same relationships that you did in the past, right? Relationships are going to change based on behaviors and things that happened. It's not like we could just go back to the way things were before. Your relationships need to be different because you're going to be different, because you are healing and you are changing. You're going to have different expectations of yourself, and you're going to have different expectations of the relationship now that you know what to expect. So one of the most important things is just to realize, where is my head at right now? Am I thinking impulsively? Am I thinking instinctually? Or am I thinking clearly? And last month, sorry, we talked a little bit about, our cues to know when we're triggered. There's cues that happen inside of us. There's cues that happen outside of us. When I'm talking about internal cues, I'm talking about our emotions and our thoughts, right? Are my thoughts telling me to do something destructive right now? Emotional cues are anxiety, anger, depression, things like that. When I felt these things, I used to do something destructive after them. So those are cues that when I feel these things, um, I'm likely to do something destructive after this. So what do I need to do to bring myself down? And then we have our external cues, ways that we change externally in our body. So maybe I start pacing is a cue. Maybe I start looking through my phone if I'm looking for someone to do something that I shouldn't be doing with, or maybe I start cruising, and then we have physical cues, ways our body change. Maybe we start breathing really fast, or sweating, or pacing. These cues are warning signs that we're triggered and we're about to do something destructive. So it's time for us to kick it into gear. Okay. Um, so I wish there was I could give you a slide or a worksheet that says this is what you're gonna do when you're about to do something destructive. But everyone in this session is different. We all work differently. But here are some examples of things that you can do that are proven to work for some people. All right. So I encourage you to try them when you are triggered and you're feeling elevated and feeling really angry. So these are things that you could utilize and try to see if they work for you. Um, and I'll dive deeper into each of them specifically, but these work when they're practiced, not only when triggered, right? So we need to practice these things we need to practice our tools when life is going well, because then otherwise, how are we expected to practice them when things are going bad, right? We're going to have no experience and no ability to do it if we don't have the practice doing them when things are good. So even when we're a little triggered or a little off, we need to practice our tools and our skills so that they don't build up. Going back to that one straw breaking the camel's back analogy, right? When all these little things pile up, it becomes too much for us to carry. So we need to cope with these little things and deal with these little things as they happen, right? So one strategy is bilateral stimulation, and that's essentially using both sides of the body. So something you could do is if you have a ball or a pen, you can consciously pass it back and forth. Using both sides of the body uses both sides of the brain, and it has been proven for some people to lower stress, to lower anxiety. Another one is like stepping in place, or going for a walk, consciously thinking about your steps, just stepping in place, back and forth, left, right, left, right. You're using both hemispheres of the brain, and that has been proven to work for some people to help bring them down in certain situations. Um, and then there's all sorts of different breathing exercises. A really simple one that I really like, because this one you could do anywhere at any time, is called 4-4-6. And all it is an inhale for the count of four, hold it in for the count of four, and slowly exhale for the count of six. The key thing to remember for this one is that the exhale is a little bit longer than the inhale, right? So this too has been proven to, bring us down, lower stress, lower anger, lower anxiety. But these things may not work for you. Like I said, everyone is different, but I do encourage you to try these things out and to try out everything that you learn in these sessions, whatever groups you're going to figure out what does work for you, but just as importantly, figure out what doesn't work for you, because everyone here is different, and we're all going to have to utilize different coping skills. There's no one size fits all plan. When we talk about prevention plans, it's not like you're just going to have one thing you do to prevent yourself from doing a destructive behavior. You're going to have different plans. You're going to have contingency plans. Let's say your plan is to, okay, I'm going to call my brother when I'm about to do X, Y, or Z so he can help bring me down. What if your brother is not available? Then what are you going to do? A lot of times people tell me their partner is their support network, right? It's like, okay, well, what if your partner is the one that upsets you or triggers you? Then who are you going to turn to when you're triggered? What if your main coping skill is, like I said, calling your brother, but you're at work in the middle of something? You can't pick up the phone. So then maybe you could do this quick breathing exercise that I just taught you guys, right? So every um, situation requires a different response, and every response needs a backup response in case, for whatever reason, you're not able to apply that. So that's all I have for my slides, but now I'd be very interested in doing some Q&A. So let me stop sharing my screen.
And I have a couple comments before, but we do have questions too. So when you were talking about the resentment, and you talked about like girlfriend on the phone, and I thought, sometimes they're real and sometimes they're imagined. It's like I have a resentment, I mean, she could be, booking an auto appointment, but our brain goes to something that is hurtful to us. So even if the resentment isn't like she's doing something inappropriate, I'm still triggered by all of that. Um,
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that example I gave you is a perfect example of distorted thinking as well,
mhm,
right? So I making assumptions.
mhm.
I mean, I come home and I see she's on the phone. Like, she could be on the phone with her mom or a doctor's office or whatever. But in my mind, I'm like, oh, she's leaving me. And so I went to it was extreme all or nothing thinking always happens. It's one of the biggest examples of distorted thinking that we tend to do. There's almost nothing in life that is all or nothing. This person is good, this person is evil, or this person, almost everything is shades of gray, but we tend to do all or nothing. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because yeah, that the main reason I share that example is because it's actually an example of distorted thinking as well.
Yeah, and you're right. Whether you're the betrayed partner or the betraying partner, especially if our bodies are picking up on signals of like, oh, when he's been on the phone before, that was, he was acting out or whatever. So we see on the phone, and it could be a very, could be calling our sponsor, and we're going to go to the automatic, I love having a whole little. Debbie McCrae talks about having an emergency kit of like I'm going to have a bunch of things. Well, because my response if I'm in the middle of the grocery store is going to be different than if I'm at home and I can call somebody and, whatever. So, or like you said, if somebody's not available. And the breathing, I learned 10 years ago, 4-7-8. It's similar where the holding and the longer exhale, and I've used that, and in 2 minutes I can go from dysregulated to okay, I'm going to be okay. Now my brain is back online. Well, that's what the goal is, and there's hold ice in your hands. I mean, there's so many things you can do, but it's that disrupting, the tapping, like even the butterfly tapping. You can probably do this even if you're in the grocery store. I mean, anything where I'm
Mhm.
focusing on what am I going to do to get myself regulated. So my executive brain is back online instead of, the fight or flight. I'm gonna, oof, like it's terrible, I'm gonna die right now, because this is all scary. I also like that you talked about like, all the different places we can start to recognize that there's some anger or resentment, coming up, and including, but we have to learn and be intentional. It's like, okay, if I start feeling that feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I know that that's one of mine is like if my gut's clenching up, something's amiss, I
Mhm.
need to pay attention to it. But I had to learn that because I had zero clue about any of that. So all of this stuff you're talking about is being intentional and learning to have a plan in order to be able to do things, differently. I think the slow it down, Dr. Eddie Caparucci talks about that like all the time. Slow everything down. Because I think, especially as, people with addiction in our backgrounds, we're that snap, compulsive react and all of that without being mindful about, what's really going on. And am I really angry, or am I concerned that I'll be abandoned? Am I concerned about this? And and you may be abandoned, and how do we handle that if we are, all of those things, having resources and plans, can help us from going down the rabbit hole completely. So
Mhm.
um I love that you said peace is an inside job and choosing peace over control, because I was like, well, control is an illusion. I have zero control over anyone else. All I can do is have control over my actions and my reactions. So I loved when you said peace is an inside job, because yes, I can choose to have peace about this regardless of the circumstances. I really love too when you're talking about like when you started out, I'm not going to act out, it's like saying, well, I'm not going to have cancer,
Yeah.
and I was like, wow, I hadn't thought of it, in that level of extreme. Lots of people go, I'm never going to do that again. And I'm like, unless you get the support to change, of course you're going to do that again. And you mentioned food too. And I just read a little story yesterday, and it talked about somebody who had lost a significant amount of weight, gotten healthy, and then one choice she made, at Halloween, it was just like, well, one treat. And the next thing you know, she's gained 70 pounds,
Well,
and
yeah, for me, honestly, it was my father's funeral. I had this great, I was on a great diet. I was doing the intermittent fasting. I was losing
yeah.
weight, and then it was my father's funeral, and that was it. It was over. And one other thing you said, yeah, that had me thinking was in terms of fixed thinking. things used to, something that happened in the past would have resulted in you doing something and believing and telling yourself this is how I need to respond to this situation, whether it was acting out or getting in a fight or something like that. But the important thing to note is that there's no fixed way that we have to respond to anything. So something that could happen to you in the
Mm.
future, someone could disrespect you way worse than someone in the past did. That would have resulted in you, let's say, beating them up or something. But you don't have to respond that way anymore. You have to take control over your behaviors, and the way to do that is by taking control over your emotions.
I love that. And like I hear the empowerment of, I don't have to respond the way I used to. Like it isn't this automatic that I'm chained to that. It's like I can choose to do something different. And that to me is, the personal freedom to choose peace, to choose empowerment of, I can't choose what other people are going to do. I can't even choose how they feel about me or any of those things.
Yeah,
I
no,
can wish people would do things different, but that
yeah,
doesn't mean they will.
and in certain populations that I work with, especially there's some people that say, like, well, if this happens, like I'm gonna do something that I end up in jail. And I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be like that. If you tell yourself he's like, that's the way I was raised, that's the way I was taught. And it's like, okay, well, you have the power to change that. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth it for you to end up in jail, regardless of how you are wronged, right? And it's these fixed beliefs that cause us a lot of problems that we all always have to be flexible and willing to change.
I really like that idea too of like, this is how I was raised. So therefore, I have to continue to repeat the patterns. And with addiction recovery, we are looking often, there is a history, that stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we are looking to interrupt that so that narrative doesn't keep happening, on down for future generations. So having the ability to go, that's a false message that I have to do this because that's the way I was raised. I'm going to be intentional and go, okay, if this happens, I'm going to have a different plan. I'm going to have choices that I can make. And I can sure do I'm going to go to jail choice, or I can go, oh, there's probably something else that would, give me life outside of prison. Maybe that could be a better option. So, but having the ability to think it through, what I hear you saying is I'm sharing with people that you can choose something different, even if they're thinking that fixed thinking of, nope, this is what I've got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the first question, and we would welcome questions, so please type them in. So this is so betrayed partner here. I just found out about hoovering, and I definitely think my husband does this. So what I know about hoovering, to the best of my ability, is that it's about reconciliation. This makes me angry, especially when he does it in front of others. I think this is to make him look good, and when I get angry about it, of course, it makes me look like the bad person. Any tips on how to handle this anger when around others? And I love that you're asking this. How can I handle the anger when I'm around others? But I also go, how can you just handle the anger when he does this? What can you do that would help you even if you're not in public?
So I'm sorry,
Do you
hoovering.
see it in the Q&A?
Whereas,
So hoovering, I had to look it up, but hoovering is a manipulation for reconciliation. So in it, because I was like, well, that's vacuuming and like that, I'm going to
okay.
suck you back in. So that made sense to me. So
Yeah, so I think about this to make him look good. And when I get angry about it, of course, it makes me look like the bad person. And he's okay. So yeah, that might be what. So a lot, there's the law of attraction, right? Positivity brings positivity and negativity brings negativity, right? So if somebody is putting out negative energy, which it sounds like is what's happening, they're looking for and expecting negative energy back, right? And that's what they're getting, right? And that might be what they're looking for. It's going to lose its power, right? If we allow other people to control other people's behaviors to control our emotions, right? And that's natural, right? But we have to work on, reclaiming the power of our own emotions and our behaviors, right? Um, if their negativity is going to in turn make us do negative things, then they're right, right? But um, if their negativity, we don't let it impact us, then things might change in the relationship, right? I don't, and then let me read the rest of your question. Any tips on how to handle this anger when others are around? Right. So there's two elements. There's um, working on not letting it anger us as much, right? And how do I handle the anger when it is around? So we already talked about changing our state of mind and trying to not let that hurt us as much. But let's be realistic, like you probably will get angry, right? So if you are angry, one of the breathing exercises I just showed you is good. Maybe you need one strategy if we're about to do something we are going to regret is removing ourselves from the situation for a little bit, going to the restroom, taking some deep breaths, collecting ourselves, then going back, like Tammy said, and slowing down because your brain is probably racing in that moment. So doing whatever you need to do in that moment to slow down, take some deep breaths, and not let someone else's negativity turn my behaviors into more negativity, and then we're just creating this negative vacuum. And it's not like we got to be careful in those situations when it's like I'm suggesting try to not be negative, right? So we don't want to be positive in a sarcastic way, right? Because that's in a lot of ways that might even be worse, right? We want to be authentic, but we want to work on not letting other people's behaviors control our behaviors.
And I put in the chat the Healthy Boundaries Work Group for Partners. Debbie will be starting that one again in January. She is so good, like with the 4-part talking boundary, like, and I use my hand in front, like, yeah, I'm sorry that you're choosing to have this behavior, especially if you've got a boundary that we are not going to engage in these conversations, particularly in front of other people. And if we know he's going to do it again, like you're sharing, this is a problem, whether you're in private or in a group. It bothers you extra, when it's public. I can understand that, because if you're not buying into the manipulation, it's like then you look like the bad person, and the rest of the group isn't understanding all of the manipulation that's going on around that. But I'm wondering if you can have a discussion when you're not in this situation, when he's not doing it, and just say, this is I'm putting a personal boundary. This is about my emotional security, and therefore like, if you start doing that, I'm going to hold my hand up. I'm going to say, I'm the story I'm telling myself is that you're trying to manipulate and coerce me back into whatever. And so I'm going to step away, just like Herschel said. I'm going to remove myself from the situation. I'm not abandoning you, but I'm going to go take care of me so that I can get grounded and maintain my emotional, my emotional regulation. I'll check back in with you in about 20 minutes. If you choose to do this in public, I am going to make sure that I have my own transportation. I will probably leave the situation, whatever it is that it's right for you. But Debbie McRae in the Healthy Boundaries work group that starts in January, she is so good at helping, navigate those and just figuring out. And you stay completely calm. You don't raise your voice. It's just like, yep, I see this pattern happening. And so the story I'm telling myself is that you're going right back to that same place. And I'm going to remove myself because I don't want to get angry. I don't want to be dysregulated. I came to this event to have a nice time, and that's not happening. Or I'm going to go talk to my girlfriends over here. Whatever it is that you need to do that removes yourself, from that. And I know that other people don't know the situation. And here's another one of those. I can't control what people think about me. My true friends, the people that know the good in me, will understand that this is, a slant. But and it's more about, how do you feel about the person you see in the mirror? And I beg you to work on being true to that person. Okay, next question, Herschel, is do you have any tools for reframing, dissipating your anger when your addict partner has replaced acting out with emotional abuse as his release for any stress? He uses next level manipulation and abuse, mostly through passive aggressive comments, actions, and facial expressions, to bait me relentlessly until he gets a response. We have been together for 35 years, so he has studied me for exactly what buttons to push, and he uses delusion and fights dirty. Do you have any extra strength tools?
Yes, that's so 99.99 with a line percent of the time when people do or say something disrespectful to us, it has absolutely nothing to do with us and it has to do with them. But in the same light, 99.9% of the time, we tend to take it personally when it has nothing to do with us. Right. So, um, understanding that, and I don't know anything beyond this paragraph, right? But it seems like you're aware that what he's doing is a him thing and it's not a you thing. However, it is still causing you a lot of pain, which makes sense. It makes sense. It's your partner for 35 years, right? But you are allowing those things, that you are seeing them as true and allowing them to hurt you because he's doing them and saying them. So, in terms of, this is not in terms of, the boundaries and the relationship aspect of it. That's a separate conversation. What we're talking about now is how you can reframe all of this so it doesn't hurt you as much as it clearly is. Right. So understanding, okay, like he's doing these things to bring me down. He used to act out and this is his way of doing it. He wants me to snap back at him. This is what he's looking for. Right. So reframing it in that way, that this is not about me. This is him. If he's going to continue doing it, like, and he's going to continue doing it if it continues to work, right? He definitely will. Um, and at the same time, he might be looking for you to come back in a negative way, just like the last question we went. So we need to reclaim the power over our feelings and our behaviors, because he's trying to control both of them. Or I'm sorry, I don't know if it's a he. Oh, you said he. Yeah. He's trying to control the way you feel. He's trying to control your behaviors by getting you to respond negatively in response to him. And it probably has worked up until this point, but we do really need to be careful that we're not going to be passive aggressive in response to this. That we're not going to be like, oh, whatever, this doesn't bother me. Like, who cares about what you think? Because that's also it could be a negative response to him, right? So it all goes back to, what we talked about before, the what we think about ourselves and the internal view of ourselves, because his negativity seems to be making you question, your worth, right? So you need to reclaim the self-worth, the self-love, the self-value, and stop letting him control the way you feel about yourself through his negative behaviors.
And I'm going to put right back to the healthy boundaries work group that starts in January. But I'm also wondering if you can hold your emotional regulation. If when that's happening, just say, I'm really curious. What is your goal right now? Like in a just very curious way. I'm really curious. What are you hoping for right now? What yeah, and it may be, like Herschel was talking about, like I walk in and my girlfriend's on the phone. Like I'm afraid she's leaving me. Like how far can I push you to make sure that that you won't leave me? I'm not saying this is okay, logical, whatever, but like how far can I push you and make sure that you are still here with me? I mean, there's so much, but this is not recovery. when someone's doing those things. So another option would be healthy boundaries. This I'm going to step away because you're ramping up, and this is not good. I don't need to participate in this. Like you have a recovery program. I'm going to invite you to do that work, and I'll check in an hour and see where we're at. But otherwise, I'm going to remove myself from this situation because I'm not going to get pulled into this, into this. My peace is too important to me. And even having the conversation when it's not in the moment, that's even better. If you say, when you do these things, well, what is your goal? Like what are you hoping for when you're being, nasty to me and, trying to get me to react, and see if he can articulate. That might be something you want to talk about with your qualified therapist. So, because of this, I often talk about, the negative two step. You do this, I do this, you do this, I do this. And we're wearing out the floor, but we're just continuing those patterns. So unless one of us changes the choreography, and he doesn't seem, able to do that yet, then that pattern's going to stay, until one of you changes. Um, so the next one is my betrayed partner here. My partner gets very angry and will not have any difficult discussions. And so it's so frustrating. It's like stonewalling. And I feel he's darboing me as he turns it back on me.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It could be really painful, and it's unfortunately very common in betrayal when someone shuts down, gets angry, and tries to like flip the narrative. It can lead the betrayed partner feeling unheard, confused, alone. Your frustration makes a lot of sense, right? Um, so it really goes back to it's very similar to the other two, right? In terms of manipulation and boundaries for you, and unfortunately, you're working on yourself, but I don't know if your partners are in recovery or anything like that, right? So reclaiming um, reclaiming control over the way you feel, easier said than done, and removing some of the power that he has or she has, is what this is all about, right? This comes down to boundaries again, and your own self-worth and self-love, and thinking better of yourself is what this comes down to. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of the questions, is sort of betrayed partners who are still being manipulated in different ways, right? And by allowing the manipulation to essentially work, and I don't know if it is working, but to increase your negative behaviors in response, is going to likely make it so that they continue with this behavior.
And I'm the healthy boundaries work group. I know I keep talking about this, but part of that is internal boundaries, and the internal boundaries is I am not going to let myself be completely dysregulated by someone else's actions. Again, just like Herschel said, easier said than done, but being super mindful, of that. And will not have difficult discussions. Then. I've got like three things I'm thinking of at the same time. If he is abstinent, I'm going to use he and she. If he is abstinent, and perhaps you've gone through formal therapeutic disclosure, maybe not. But then couples therapy could be an option. If he's not, then couples sessions, not therapy, but couple sessions should just navigate. We need to have difficult discussions, and ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It just makes things worse. Dr. Rob did a podcast with Dr. Stan Tatkin in January of 2019, and I still refer to it all the time, but it's called We Do. And in a healthy relationship, we are, you and me against the world. We are stronger than either of us. We are healthier. We are happier. We are all of that. But when this kind of stuff is going on, then it's not, then we're neither one healthy or happy or any of that. So it behooves all of us to want to be in a healthy relationship rather than a toxic one. And we lose sight of that. So, but one of the things, Dr. Rob talks often about the opposite of addiction is healthy attachment. But when one partner is indifferent, they're no longer in the game. It isn't like I love you, I hate you, that you're still in the game. If you're indifferent, that's a relationship that's most likely to not continue. So if a betraying partner can get you all riled up, then you're still in the game, and even if this is all, a subconscious level, well, you're still here with me. I'm pushing all your buttons. You're mad at me, but you're still with me. Again, not saying this is okay. Like we're talking primitive emotional, things with somebody newly on a recovery path. Abstinence is just not doing what we weren't supposed to do in the first place. Sobriety is, I'm starting to get a clue, but real recovery takes 2 to 5 years, and that's if someone is doing the work so that they can make progress to do so. So, if someone is early on this journey, they're lacking tools, and the more work they are doing with their sponsor, with their qualified therapist, with their accountability peers, all of those things, the 12-step groups, the more progress they can make. Talking about anger, like anger comes up at 12-step meetings fairly often in the groups I go to. Maybe there's a theme with us, but we talk about, those kind of things. That's a great place to process. I have these feelings coming up, and how do I learn to do things differently so I'm not expressing it, in a big and powerful way, outwardly, that causes, repercussions, with my partner. There, all of those things. So there's opportunities if you're, but I also hear he won't have any difficult discussions. So, what is your boundary partner about, if he's not willing to have those discussions, what does that mean for you? Because, again, nothing changes if nothing changes, and you guys are doing that, negative two-step. So, okay, we are out of time. Thank you so much. This is so useful. And as usual, I hear things that, I either haven't heard before or haven't thought of. And so it's always really good. This is a stressful time with family, etc., friends, sometimes not friends, work people, or whatever. So having these tools to be able to just be
Yeah.
intentional about, what we're doing, and learning to take care of ourselves, so that we can show up in our best possible way, be gracious to ourselves, and and know it's a process. It is, is key to moving forward. So
Yeah. Thank
so
you guys so much for your time, and I appreciate the questions, and have a wonderful holiday season, and keep doing the work that you guys are doing.
thank you, Herschel. Thanks, everyone. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.